now I'm always pleased to welcome and have conversation with Congressman Brad Wenstrup. Brad, welcome back to the program, my friend. It's always great having you on the show.
Thanks, Brian. Good to be with you. You got quite a lineup this morning.
Oh, yeah. Thanks to Joe Strecker, man. It's just I love talking to people, and I certainly enjoy talking to you, and that's what makes the show, getting interesting folks and people with their finger on the pulse of the government, which you are, and you also have your finger on the pulse of what's going on at the border. I understand you actually, unlike our vice president who's been charged with solving the problems that exist at the border, Congressman Wenstrup, you went there. What was your experience like?
Yeah, we went down as the Doctors Caucus, and we also had members from an Intelligence Committee going down as well. What became clear to us, Brian, is there is a need for our president, President Biden, and our vice president, and really Dr. Fauci, or maybe even Dr. Walensky of the CDC. They need to go down there. You know, I'm somewhat familiar with this type of an environment, especially from the healthcare standpoint, right? Because I served on Cincinnati Board of Health, which is nothing to the level of what's taking place at the border. But I also served in Iraq, and I was chief of surgery at Abu Ghraib prison, taking care of 5,000 detainees. But this is a humanitarian crisis. It was predictable. The Border Patrol told us that once Joe Biden won and they heard what policies he wanted to implement, they started to get ready as best they could. But they have been turned from law enforcement, which is their job, the job they signed up for and trained for, into social workers, to daycare workers, sometimes to healthcare workers. Their job is to stop crime, stop criminals, protect America, and at the same time facilitate legal travel, legal trade, and their job has changed, and they are overwhelmed. And look, I understand why people want to come here. You know, I got the paperwork from Ellis Island from my great-grandfather bringing my grandfather in. But I think a lot of people were misled and hoaxed. And when you think of, you're going to get free health care and everybody can come on in, we had 172,000 just in March, and those are the ones that we know of. And the whole process is inhumane. You have women and children that are being trafficked, and no one comes through without the cartels and smugglers. That is a fact. Well, and Title 42 was in place to return people. They were returning to Mexico, stay in place in Mexico, be part of the migration protection protocols where they could be processed in Mexico. And Joe Biden said, well, anyone under 7, we're going to let them in. Well, the cartels know this. And so guess what? They start bringing in people under 7. You know, they're very calculated. They're very capable.
Well, they're entrepreneurs, aren't they? They are in this to make money.
Totally. The children are pawns.
Okay.
You know,
all right.
Paid to send their children, and some are paid to have their children used for this process.
Well, let me ask you this. I brought this up this morning. I'm going to get you, because you've been there and you've seen this. These guys are interested in making money. And they take these children on what could amount to a 1,000-mile journey from Central America all the way up to our border. Is it possible, if they're in the business of making money, Congressman Wenstrup, and they happen to run across a pedophile or two as they're bringing this child up to the border, do you think they might want to go ahead and exchange goods and services, for money? Maybe pass off one of these poor 7-year-old kids to a pervert in return for money, Congressman Wenstrup?
They have no respect for human life or human dignity. We know this. Sometimes, how are some of the women paying? Well, if they don't have the cash, they sometimes have to deliver other services.
Jeez.
And then when they get here, now it's so incredible at the overcrowding. In one facility, in the Donna facility, by CDC guidelines, it can hold 250 people. The day we were there, they had 3,500.
Oh,
Had up to 5,000. They have cubicle areas where for the kids that should hold 33 people, I saw 393 in one, 413 in another, and 600 in another. I mean,
it's like sardines in a can.
Don't get me wrong; they are doing the best they can. I feel for the Border Patrol. They're retiring. It's just like our police in our cities now too. If they can retire, they're just getting out because this isn't the job they signed up for. But they're doing screenings. They're testing for. They're seeing chicken pox. They're seeing lice, scabies, flu, fever of unknown origin, meningitis. They do have EMT present. And they only test for COVID if someone's symptomatic. They just don't have the manpower to do this. Once they're moved on, then they get tested for COVID. They are delivering food, clothes, showers every day, but they're only supposed to hold them for 72 hours by law. Health and Human Services under this administration, are there to try and manage the policies that the president put in place, and they're nowhere near capable. They build a new facility, brand new. It's going to be nice. It's going to be nice for children. It holds 1,500.
Oh,
That's
jeez.
not be enough. You now have 3 Border Patrol agents covering 23 miles in one section we went to. In the Rio Grande Valley, they cover 227 miles total. And so what happens is they are bogged down with all this. The cartels are watching their every move. The drugs are coming across. And the state of Texas is stepping up because the Texas Department of Public Safety is doing what they can on their side of the border once people are in Texas, and so are the National Guard. But they do not have the same federal role that the Border Patrol is supposed to do. And one other thing is President Biden stopped building the wall. We saw an area, Brian, that it's not only a wall to keep America safe and to help catch criminals, it's the flood wall. And it's laying there with concrete, chunks of concrete, rebar. Matter of fact, one policeman got hurt because he was chasing someone at night and ended up tripping over some of that and became injured. I mean, you just can't make this up. They've done everything they possibly can to create a very inhumane situation, and it is a crisis. And it's not just a crisis for Americans; it's a crisis for the people that are involved.
Yes, yes, it is. And, people might say, well, they have a terrible time in their country, and this is why they make the journey. But obviously, you've identified, and we've identified, and everyone has heard at least anecdotally or reporting on the horrors that are associated with making that trip. But if you explain to people up front, as Donald Trump was very effective at doing, that it is going to be a difficult process. You're going to have to wait outside of the United States for this hearing. You're not going to be released into the interior. It stems the flow of people who are willing to try and make the journey, which is a laudable goal.
Right, and then I hear the administration now is talking about, well, we may send some money to those countries to kind of out with this. Well, where's that money going? Because I tell you, if you're not stopping the cartels, and these rules are still in place, they're going to come. The difference, the amount of unaccompanied children that have come through now. The cartels are playing by the rules that Biden put in place, and same with the families. And so the stay in Mexico policy was working. We were supportive of that. They had the chance to seek asylum and go through the paperwork and make their claims, but on the other side of the river. And when that happened, and that was working, then the cartels back off because they can't deliver on the promise of getting you into the United States.
Indeed. And I found it a little, I don't know if it's irony, but it certainly is given what you describe at the border, Congressman Wenstrup, given the stopping and the construction of the wall, given the lax security or complete lack of security brought about by this crisis. Press Secretary Psaki was talking to reporters on Monday, talking about what the administration was doing. She said there have been series of bilateral discussions between leadership and the regional governments of Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala. Though through these discussions, there was a commitment to, and I thought this was hilarious, Congressman Wenstrup, to increase border security. So Mexico made the decision to maintain 10,000 troops on its southern border, resulting in twice as many daily migrant interdictions. Guatemala sought 1,500 police, military, blah, blah, blah. Honduras, 7,000 police. Bottom line is she is saying that they helped negotiate the securing of those borders, but haven't done jack squat to do anything about our border. How can you reconcile that?
You can't. You can't make this stuff up because the political narrative that they're espousing is that we are just open to anybody coming in here, which is what the far left wants. And I don't think the majority of Americans want this. Look, we know we're a nation of immigrants. We all get that. Unless you're Native American, we all came from somewhere else. We get that. But we also are a nation of law and order. And that's why I think a lot of people want to come to the United States. So why are we turning our country into the type of country that they're trying to leave? And that's what the left seems to want, and it's really not good for the country, obviously. Well, and I think that they've overstepped, and I think that at the end of the day, they're going to hear about it from the American people, but it might be through elections and maybe not sooner.
Well, one more fun fact before we take a break on this immigration subject. I saw this Washington Examiner article talking about what the government is spending per hotel bed to house some 80,000 migrant families that it is anticipating to come across the border. They're looking at $352.64 per hotel bed per day. These are unfathomable. I mean, who's responsible for negotiations?
We have veterans living on the street.
I know. Congressman Wenstrup, pause. We will continue. We'll talk infrastructure, and of course, the pause in the J&J vaccine is kind of giving people a little bit of concern about maybe the rush to judgment on these vaccines. We'll hear from Dr. Congressman Wenstrup on that subject as well. Don't go to City Talk Station. Brian Thomas here with Congressman Brad Wenstrup. We just got done talking about the immigration disaster going on the border. Real quick, Congressman Wenstrup, I noticed, and one of the problems with this is the federal government ends up taking these migrants and pretty much dumping them off in our interior. And I noted that the South Carolina's Department of Social Services director let their governor know, Governor McMaster, that the federal government had made inquiries about transporting an unknown number of unaccompanied migrant children from the southern border and putting them in South Carolina's foster care group homes. Mm-hmm. They're licensed by that Department of Social Services. McMaster says, well, hey, we have to have our South Carolina children come first. Our system is already strained. We can barely handle the number of South Carolinian displaced children, let alone take on what the federal government decides to dump on us. So that's just one illustration of the ripple effect that this problem has. Our resources, nationally and locally, are all at their breaking point in terms of dollars. How can we manage to take on more in the social welfare system?
Well, it's typical of the federal government. They just mandate that you do something or suggest that you do something and don't understand because they don't live in the trenches of what it takes to actually institute something like that. But that's the truth. They did say that like 85% of the people coming through do have someone to go to. In other words, somebody who has already come in, somebody who has gotten set up somewhere. They have a phone number, or some have relatives. And a lot of times it's those relatives that pay the final bill. So a lot of the people that come through, some go through Catholic Charities for a while, and then others go to what's called a stash house, which are operated by the cartels, and you're pretty much held there until you paid your bill in one form or another. Really what we need, especially for these kids, is probably a huge boys' town, girls' town type orphanage where they can be actually raised and educated and things like that if we're going to maintain people coming in like this. But that's another story altogether because we know there's better ways of doing this than having people just come in mass illegally.
Well, a boys or girls town type of thing might be considered infrastructure. I know we have this massive infrastructure bill that Biden's pushing, which ultimately is the Green New Deal, wolf in sheep's clothing kind of thing. What's your take on it?
Well, that's pretty much what we're looking at. It's another thing like the $1.9 trillion bill that was supposed to be for COVID relief that touched on so many other things. Look, we need to continue the construction of the wall and other things like that. That would be a good infrastructure project, especially where it's part of the flood wall. But, they're saying now that paid leave is infrastructure, child care is infrastructure, caregiving is infrastructure. These are all important things that we can address, but they're not infrastructure. So, they try to label it under something that sounds good, that every American is for, and it's such as COVID relief, but then they bury into it all types of other things. And that's why it ends up being partisan bills, because it ends up being more of a liberal far-left wish list than it is really an infrastructure bill that's there to benefit all Americans.
Well, and I guess my question is, Congressman Wenstrup, can they get it through? I know there's been talk and rumblings about reconciliation. What is there anything you can't get through with reconciliation if you just call it that?
There are some limits on that because it has to, well, in the Senate they have the Byrd rule, which I guess they could always waive, that put some limits on it, and the parliamentarian rules on that. And then it has to be having some nexus with the budget. But there's a lot of ways of maneuvering that. Look, we did it with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. There's no doubt about it. We did it that way. But look at the difference between that. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act led to decreased unemployment, increase of revenues to the government, less inversions, more jobs for minorities. You saw all these positive things happen from it.
Yeah.
So this is just still more money going out the door without any any responsibility. You know, one test that we all should put ourselves through here in Congress is when you're passing a bill, does it provide more freedom for people, and will the next generation say thank you? Those are two things that you might want to put to the test when we're passing bills.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Can you stay by for one more segment, Congressman Wenstrup? I only have you down at the 7:25. I don't know if you're busy or you could occupy our otherwise local news segment with a discussion about the J&J vaccine pause.
Yeah, I'll stick around. I have something at 8 o'clock, so I can stick around for another section.
Wonderful. After Congressman Wenstrup, we'll hear from A.W.R. Hawkins, the Second Amendment columnist over at Breitbart News. That'll be at 7:40. So, J&J vaccine coming up next of the guy we're talking with right now, Congressman Brad Wenstrup, who is also a doctor. It's good to point that out because he gets to speak with some measure of authority. Although, given that Dr. Fauci's in charge of things, I don't know that being a doctor alone qualifies you. Congressman Wenstrup, what's the story on the J&J COVID-19 vaccine pause? I thought these things were all properly vetted, and the rush to market to get these things out was totally justifiable and didn't represent a risk to us.
Yeah, let me backpedal a little bit of what you said there about Dr. concerns I have too with some of the people that are speaking, and that doesn't mean I'm necessarily the best one all the time. But you have epidemiologists and virologists that are only focusing on the virus itself, and they aren't necessarily looking at the health of all Americans. And with that, I mean our economic health, our depression, our suicides, our domestic violence, all these things and the lack of things being diagnosed because we were locked down. But that's another story. But going to the J&J, in these trials, we were, as doctors in Congress, we were very much involved with Operation Warp Speed. And you had about 30 to 50,000 people in these trials, where normally in a trial there's 8 to 10,000. So a lot of people in the trial, and they weren't declared eligible for emergency use authorization until enough time had passed. So you could look for some more potential side effects. So this is kind of coming out of the blue, but at the same time, let's put everything in perspective. One, the good news is, amazingly, we have 3 vaccines within a year. And so there's 2 others that people can go to. But you had 6 people, and I'm not playing down for those 6 people, but 6 people out of 6.8 million people had this negative reaction. Now, just look at in general, compare that to about 1 in 1,000 women can get similar blood clots from taking birth control pills. So we know that. I mean, in my practice, I saw a lot of times you're the first to diagnose that someone's having a clotting problem. They show up in the extremities. Sometimes comes from an aneurysm somewhere else. It's then throwing clots down to the extremities. But birth control pills, smoking, obesity, being sedentary, and things like aneurysms. These are all things that we see on a regular basis, and probably in a higher number. And when I first heard this, that they said there were 6 people, and it was 6 women, and they're in a certain age group, my mind went to these things. Are they part of the process here? In other words, when we're looking at these 6 patients, did they have other things existing that could have led to the clots as well? So I think it's important to always look at these types of things, but I'm not so sure that it was the vaccine that necessarily caused it. So fine, go get the other vaccines in the meantime. But I'm not so sure that this is directly related to the vaccine itself.
You mentioned that the comorbid conditions. You rattled off a handful of them. That seems to be the leading indicator as to whether you're going to succumb to this virus or not. Is there going to be a sort of a nationwide effort to get America to wake up to the obesity reality that we are living, eating, and breathing right now, real time, that obviously is a broader health concern? I mean, prior to COVID showing up as already the second leading cause of preventable death, we just piling on with this COVID.
Brian, you can look at things that are in high numbers and cost the American people a lot through the government healthcare programs. And obesity is one of them. Diabetes is another, which in some cases those go hand in hand. And then Alzheimer's. So maybe we need an Operation Warp Speed. And so some of these things like Alzheimer's, I think that those things come on through no fault of the patient. but the others may be able to be controlled behaviorally. Not always with diabetes, I get that, and not always with obesity, but there is a lot to be said for that. And how do we incentivize good health? So on the big picture, what we talk about in the Doctor's Caucus, how do we incentivize positive behaviors, and rather than just treating people when they're ill. And we're great at treatments and innovations, and I don't want that to stop. But rather than just doing that, how do we improve people's, not lifespan so much, but their health span? How do we keep them on track, maintained, and healthy? I had a cartoon drawn up years ago, and I haven't used it in anything yet, where it's an obese gentleman. He's got a cigarette in his mouth, a beer in his hand, and a donut in the other hand. And he's watching his friend who looks fit changing the oil in his car, and he says, I wouldn't put that crummy oil in my car. Why? Because it would be very costly.
Yeah.
If he used crummy oil, he perceives. But he's okay with doing it to his own body. And so, we've got to build in incentives for good health.
Well, you set up a great incentive right there. What's the guy working on? A car. What happens when you go to apply for auto insurance? They underwrite you. They look at your record, your age. They weigh the things that they know make you a good driver and a poor driver. Like, older you get, the more stable you are with the family, the better driver. Statistics have proven this. Your credit score has a bearing on how good of a driver you are. If you're got a brand new licensed teenager, trust me, you're not going to be able to find an insurance company that's going to insure that Ferrari or whatever you would like to drive, because you are a massive risk. They don't do that with health insurance, Congressman Wenstrup. You show up at your business, you're placed on the company policy, you pay the same amount regardless of what your neighbor does by way of taking care of themselves or not. There's no underwriting standards. If your health had a direct bearing on how much you paid for health insurance, something tells me people might take a little closer look at it, like driving.
Well, yeah, especially the things that you can control.
Only what you can control.
In healthcare, because there's the risk of bad behavior, of risky behavior,
right.
Health behavior, and then there's the risk of bad luck.
Right. I got cancer. I mean, that was cosmic crapshoot. How'd you end up with low spectrum lymphoma? I don't know. They didn't say, Brian, it was your lifestyle. This is what you did that ultimately transformed. So, cosmic crapshoot, one thing, but, if you've got diabetes because your diet sucks, that's something that's controllable and can be managed. So, anyway.
And if we go that route, Brian, where we're doing more health visits rather than just sick visits, then we pick up sooner. And then we all know the sooner you catch something, the more likely you are to maybe even be able to cure something.
Amen.
So we want to continue going in that direction and finding cures, and I think that is the way to go. But you look at, say, someone on Medicaid, they pay absolutely nothing. So they don't even think about going to a well visit or something like that, nor is a doctor necessarily incentivized to want to see you to keep you well. They're going to wait till you're sick before you come in, especially if you have low payments. What if people in that situation were somehow incentivized to make sure that they go and get checked? And make sure that they go, or their kids, make sure that they go to get their vaccines and things like that. I think we could do a whole lot better. We have to incentivize health more than just have treatments available when you're already in trouble.
Solving the problems of the world today, Congressman Wenstrup. Always enjoy talking with you. Between now and our next conversation, I wish you the best of health, you and your family, and I'll look forward to having you back on the program real soon, sir.
Thanks, Brian. Stay well.
You too.